So on my Instagram, I talked about Jumanji 2 being transhumanist propaganda. And of course, a lot of people were like, what does that mean? Because I said I liked the movie. I didn't want to answer on my Instagram, so I'm answering here. So I'm just going to talk for a second and try to explain what I meant. Now, in Sanjana, which is an episode of Black Mirror, an escape to a digital world is positioned not only as a way to escape death, which is huge, leaving our physical form into a kind of artificial heaven is positioned not as a bad thing, not as a trap, not as some sort of weird nether space where humanity is stuck forever, kind of like some sort of bardo in the Buddhist religion where we're just trapped, our souls are empty, but instead as this idyllic paradise that we can leave instead of experiencing physical death. It's not only positioned that way, but it's also positioned as a realm in which we can explore things, specifically our sexualities, in ways that we weren't allowed to when we had a physical form. A woman who's never done anything homosexual finds a homosexual relationship and happiness and fulfillment in a seeming everlasting afterlife as scored by Belinda Carlisle, Heaven is a Place on Earth. So it very literally is like, maybe technology is good. Then, in what I think is the best episode of Black Mirror, because I think it's the smartest, Striking Vipers, you have, God, I can't believe people didn't talk about it more, because it's the bravest statement I've ever seen anything make about sexuality and gender and where our society is going, which is that it posits the idea that in a post-physical world, all of our ideas about heterosexuality, homosexuality, transsexuality, and gender are meaningless. None of it matters when we can segregate ourselves from our physical form and become a different thing, not simply an avatar, but an extension of our being. Not simply an icon to click on, but an actual representation of our true self. The idea, sort of the pseudo-religious idea of the soul, like what is humanity beyond consciousness? Well, turns out, if you're a dude who's married, you might want to fuck another dude's personality in a video game. And maybe he's a hot woman, or maybe you're a dude who's straight his whole life and you want to fuck another man as a man. And Striking Vipers really sort of articulately nails this transition and has one of the best endings of any Black Mirror episode and just is the best one. And if you haven't watched it, it's just chef's kiss. It's perfect. And Anthony Mackie's brilliant. All the performances are brilliant. Doesn't matter. We're not here to talk about Black Mirror. So Jumanji 1 is a magic movie. The first Jumanji with Robin Williams is about a magical board game. The world of Jumanji is positioned as a pocket dimension or possibly an alternate dimension. The movie is magical realistic with a fantasy twist, so it doesn't go deep into its lore. We don't know almost anything about where the Jumanji video game came from. But it doesn't matter because it's fantasy. The Jumanji reboot series, which I think is really good, it's one of those things where you're watching it and you're like, this is good? The studio made a Jumanji, and it just feels, it's so nice when it's like the Lego movie where you go in and you're like, oh, it's good. But the Jumanji reboot series is science fiction. It's not magical. And similarly, it's magical realistic, at least at first, and therefore it doesn't waste any time going into the lore of where the Jumanji video game came from. In the sequels, it's a video game. If you don't know that, spoilers for the first 2 minutes of the Jumanji reboot, I don't care. So the interesting thing about Jumanji 1 is how it played with gender, race, and identity. Okay, and no one even really seemed upset about it because the movie was funny and it didn't out loud say what it was doing. But you have a traditionally feminine woman, a Western feminine woman, oh my God, blah, 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 fashion and nails. That girl gets put into what is a more masculine trope than Jack Black. And then you have him putting out feminine, signaling feminine the whole movie because he's speaking as her. At first, she despises his body, but by the end of the movie, she's come to not only love his body, but feel comfortable expressing sexual arousal for the Jonas brother within that body. So she's okay to be horny as a man who has a totally different physical body type than her actual body. Similarly, a skinny white guy is put into a huge person of color with The Rock. You have this nerdy white kid becoming this dreamboat, Dr. Rock or whatever his name, Stoneheart or something. But what's so interesting about that is that, as expressed through Jumanji 1 and 2, it's not a fantasy for him. Instead, it allows him to explore a part of his own personality. He doesn't become more like The Rock. He recognizes the things within himself that are like The Rock. At the opening of Jumanji 2, he's experiencing depression and anxiety because he no longer feels like The Rock. So I hope you're staying with me. I'm excited to explain this. What's so interesting is that in the Jumanji reboot series, these entities that we beam into through this video game and this constructed digital world, or maybe fantasy world, the movie doesn't explain it, they are part of us. They are not merely a video game character, but they allow us to express and discover things within ourselves. The nerdy girl gets to be a hot girl with a nice body, and the big football player experiences what it's like to be short. Okay, so that one isn't perfect, but I'm sure if time goes on long enough, there will be a short people rights movement. So, what's so fascinating about this is that in the sequel, we go a step further, because now we have old people. Specifically, we have Danny Glover's character. Spoilers for Jumanji 2 Inbound. Danny Glover's character has terminal cancer. And at the end of the movie, he chooses to stay in Jumanji as a horse. I'm sorry, as a horse? So he identifies as an animal. Okay, well, cute, it's a kid's movie, right? Well, no, because at one point they talk about how big the horse's dick is. So it's a sexualized flying horse that he can live as happily instead of accepting physical death. And this isn't positioned as a compromise, it's positioned as an escape. This is different from the way we used to portray this stuff, okay? Remember how much we all hated Cypher for being like, I'd rather live in the Matrix? But then some people were like, well, I'd rather live in the Matrix. And your friends were like, what? You wouldn't want to live in the real world? It's like, no, I don't want to eat the porridge and do the weird cave orgy. And it's like, yeah, Cypher's perspective, other than him selling out and murdering his friends, is theoretically valid. But it was a minority perspective. Now, as we become more and more comfortable with representing ourselves online, with performing our personalities, with creating a curated idea of ourselves, with plastic surgery levels at an all-time high, and most plastic surgeries being easier to achieve and cheaper than ever, and Facetune, and Instagram, and it goes on, and I'm not one of those people, but when you watch at the end of a movie a guy being like, I'm gonna live in a computer as a horse, and everyone in the movie goes, you can't help but feel it's portentous. And not pretentious, portentous, as in a portent thing to come. Me explaining that to you was pretentious, but let's leave it alone, and let's talk about one last thing that is so endlessly fascinating about Jumanji and the place we're at with transhumanism. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just a pop movie, a smart, well-written pop movie that is embracing the zeitgeist. And the zeitgeist right now is, I want abs, but I don't want to work out. I want to be happy with how I look, but I don't want to have to leave the house to be seen. I want to hang out with my friends, but I'm not returning texts, I'm not returning calls. So like, I've been there, you've been there. Wouldn't it be amazing to be able to be something else, to be someone else? And isn't it possible that this is right around the corner, way sooner than we think? Movies are ending with main characters choosing to be immortal digital avatars. This is new and it's weird. Remember Lawnmower Man? Remember Tron? The world inside the computer used to be a cold illusion. Now the world inside the computer, Jumanji, is more beautiful than our real world could ever be. Ready Player One positions a world that has become postmodern to the point of suffocation. People are inundated with references and ideas from the past. Jumanji is an idea from the future. And that's what I mean by Jumanji is transhumanist propaganda. And keep your eyes open. The transhumanist stuff isn't going to go away anytime soon. In fact, I think it's going to become a lot more blatant.